In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in the Plessy v. Ferguson case that the racial segregation of public facilities was legal. Thus, students of color could not attend white public schools. There was separation from people of color and whites in daily life things like bathrooms, grocery stores, etc. People deemed this segregation unconstitutional and took their opinions to the court. The Brown v. Board of Education case, fighting for equality of the races, sparked the civil rights movement.
American plaintiff Oliver Brown filed a lawsuit against the Board of Education after his daughter was denied access in Topeka, Kansas's all-white elementary schools. He claimed schools for blacks were not as equal as schools for whites, which did not agree with the ruling of Plessy v. Ferguson. To solve this problem, President Dwight D. Eisenhower appointed Governor of California Earl Warren as Chief Justice and was put onto the case. Now, although students of color were able to gain an education after the ruling of Brown v. Board of Education, people still continued to segregate people of color and protest against the ruling, forcing U.S. authority to get involved. Colored students were able to gain an education, and history was changed when they started facing, changing, and overcoming discrimination they faced in their country and throughout the nation in order to learn. In 1956, black students entered their high school for the first time, while their white classmates at school looked on and watched them enter. It took immense courage to enter this building, and the students entering for the first time were certainly facing verbal discrimination against them as they entered. In Arkansas in 1957, 9 black teenagers with good grades were selected to be the first to be integrated into their high school. They faced immense harassment and mobs of white people who opposed this court decision. Despite all of this, they were able to courageously rise above and attend this school anyway. They were determined to get their right to learn. 8 out of the 9 of the Little Rock students finished high school. At the University of Alabama, 2 students, Vivian Malone and James Hood, enrolled as one of the first 2 students of color. Malone became the first African American to graduate from the University of Alabama in 1965. Hood left and attended school in Michigan. In 1996, many years later after being thoroughly involved in the civil rights movement, Malone went on to be the first recipient of the Lorleen B. Wallace Award of Courage. She was chosen by the George Wallace Foundation, and she was given the award by the former governor. These courageous people were also able to send their own children to schools, including the Barnard School in Washington, D.C.
Before Brown v. the Board of Education, many excuses were made as to the reasoning behind separation but equality. But as time went on and the ruling legally made segregation unconstitutional, more malicious acts took place, which further proved that this separation was based on nothing other than race. On December 4th of 1956, Reverend Paul Turner of the First Baptist Church in Clinton was brutally beaten while escorting black students to school. Photos show authority figures armed with guns making sure that the kids are able to go to school safely. Protesting ensued, and a mob of people who realized the students had entered the school ended up attacking 7 journalists. The next day, President Eisenhower ordered paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division to the school, escorting students to the building and singling out troublemakers bent on disrupting the federal mandate. Riots broke out at the University of Alabama when Autherine Lucy attempted to attend class and university officials asked her to withdraw. Little Rock 9 supporter Daisy Bates went on to write The Long Shadow of Little Rock. In her book, she recalls a time when her friend Ben came home crying. He says, "Daisy, they spat in my face. They called me a dirty Jew. I've been a marked man ever since the day Elizabeth tried to enter Central." To note the severity of the case, President Dwight D. Eisenhower states, "Now, let me make it very clear that federal troops are not being used to relieve local and state authorities of their primary duty to preserve the peace and order of the community. Nor are the troops there for the purpose of taking over the responsibility of the school board and other responsible local officials in running Central High School. The running of our school system and the maintenance of peace and order in each of our states are strictly local affairs, and the federal government does not interfere, except in a very few special cases and when requested by one of the several states."
Although the ruling of the Supreme Court case did allow students of color to attend school, it did not prevent people from protesting and going against the government's ideas. People disagreed with the ruling and wanted it to be changed.
And the oath of my office, taken the following action. Units of the National Guard have been and are now being mobilized.
People protested everywhere about the newly decided law, especially in places like Little Rock, Arkansas, where the students of color were beginning to attend white public schools. In Little Rock, people put up segregation pickets protesting about the 9 students allowed to attend public schools. People did not agree with Governor Orval Faubus's decision and want to change it immediately.
Kids were following the colored students to school and harassing them with nasty comments. The students could not get a break. People would constantly follow them and say mean comments to frustrate them in order to get their way. Segregationists were kicked out from the masses of people crowding around the schools in order to protect the 9 colored students from being beaten or crowded. When the Little Rock Nine started attending public high school in the eyes of their community and their nation, they were certainly terrified as they faced some horrific things, such as vulgar language and massive mobs that truly expressed how badly they didn't want people of any other color attending their schools. Elizabeth Ekman attended school at a different time from the rest of her 8 peers on the first day. She was all alone, and people still did not let up, and they continued to taunt her with cruel language and do everything in their power to keep her out of that building. She kept her lips sealed and stood patiently and calmly until she could go in. Joanne Crozier Allen states that, "I began to wonder and think, well, maybe they just weren't going to accept us like I thought they were. They looked like they just wanted to grab us and throw us out. They didn't want us at all. I could just see the hate in their heart. Such malicious hatred is simply coming from the fact that there are 12 new students in this school." The high school that the Clinton 12 attended was eventually bombed. People hated the idea of them being there so much that they felt that they needed to put many other people in danger in order to get their message of hatred across to these 12 kids.
A struggle was created between a government that was now obligated to interrogate all public schools and recalcitrant communities were determined to maintain the status quo. But as time went on, people began overcoming their anger about the final decision of the court case and were able to finally live equal lives between whites and blacks.